Okay, everybody. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us for your lunch hour. If you're on the East Coast, we're thrilled to have you here for the first in our series for pre-retirees. Today's session is called Get Ready to Retire with These Smart Moves. So our goal today is to give you some thought kind of around some things you ought to be looking at as you get nearing retirement or as you go to retire. So presumably, if you're on this call, you're interested in kind of what should you be doing in that transition phase. 55 on, maybe you're already retired, and that's fine too. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is applicable, as you are in that transition phase and all the way into that distribution phase. So again, really happy to have you here. Couple notes here, just down below, you can see today is the first in our series. The next one's going to be November 17th, so mark your calendars. That's going to be on Social Security. So we're going to dig in a little bit more depth on Social Security there. And then on December 10th, we're going to talk about estate planning. So today we're going to cover a broader spectrum of stuff, and then we'll dig deeper in the next couple of ones that we do. And we will today have a Q&A session at the end. And we're also going to follow up with a deliverable. So after our session today, we'll send out an email to you, and we'll include our budget worksheet. So that'll give you something to work on in between the next session and this one. And, hopefully just sit back and grab a pad and a pen and get ready to hopefully learn something. And again, just sort of the idea is to get you thinking about some of these things that are important as you get into the red zone. And I promise that's the last football analogy I'll use. Patriots fans had a rough weekend, so that's the end of that one. But anyway, my name is Jamie Worrell, and I am a financial advisor. I'll be your moderator today. I'm one of the founders of Strategic Retirement Partners, and I will be gathering your questions during this session and then compiling them at the end and then walking through. So again, as the moderator, I'm going to interject if there's a point that I think we want to make sure we hit on the head, and then I'll be looking for your questions as we go. And because I won't be talking a whole lot, I'll be able to focus on your questions. So don't be shy. Send them our way, and we'll get to as many of them as we can in the last part of our session. I've been doing this now in terms of advising individuals about their investments in retirement for over 20 years, a good bit more than over 20 years, actually. And I love what I do. What I love to do is to help people really kind of envision their future and then help them create steps and an action plan to get them there. And I think you'll hear from Mark and Zach, they feel the same way. But again, that's our passion, is to help you. And so we're hoping to open up the lines of communication so that we can offer that to you, when you need it. And so I'm going to introduce Mark, and then I'm going to go over a little bit of housekeeping. So Mark's the Director of Financial Planning for Strategic Retirement Partners here in the Northeast. He is a certified financial planning professional who works with clients to help them plan, invest, and implement solutions for pursuing their financial goals and priorities. He joined SRP in 2011 to lead the employee education effort and manage a growing wealth management practice. In addition to his certified financial planner designation, Mark also holds a Series 7 and Series 66 FINRA licenses. He is also insurance licensed in several states where SRP conducts business. In 2009, Mark earned the Chartered Financial Consultant designation and is a registered representative with LPL Financial. He's also an investment advisor representative with Global Retirement Partners. So, and then Zach is also a panelist. Zach is a financial advisor on our team who you may have met if you're one of our 401k clients. Zach is on site quite a bit, obviously not so much during COVID, but Zach's another tremendous resource for you here that's part of our team. And so we work as part of a team, and the three of us coordinate and communicate and make sure everything's being attended to. And Zach's an important member of that team. You'll hear from Zach in a minute. So housekeeping items, all lines are muted during the call, but we do welcome your questions, as I mentioned. You can submit those on the chat feature, which is usually it's at the bottom of your screen. So look for it there. It's a little like a little text bubble and says chat underneath it, and you can just type your question in there to all the panelists. Send those anytime during the presentation, so as they occur to you, and again, I'll be compiling them and addressing them during our Q&A session. If you have any technical issues, same thing, just hit a chat and let me know. and we'll try to get you some help or assistance as we can. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. And Mark, why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
All right, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to kind of hide this video here so you can see the screen better, and we'll go from there. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Beausoleil, as Jamie mentioned, and probably not a bad idea let's define our terms. So bear with me a second. Get the video back. Retirement. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Probably not a bad idea to have a common understanding of what we're discussing today. So retirement, it means a lot of different things to different people, but for today's purposes, we'll define retirement as stopping work. So, stopping your primary income source from a job. Some people think of retirement as having financial independence or maybe a transition, working part-time. But again, for today's purposes, let's assume that you're deciding to completely stop working and earning income to support yourselves. So with that, let's get right into it. Key questions that we all need to be answering for ourselves. Do I have enough dollars? Am I on track for retirement? If I'm not on track, what do I have to do now to get myself on track? How much do I need? Can I retire early if it applies to me? These questions seem simple enough, but it's very important that you're able to answer these questions with a high degree of confidence before you decide to leave the workforce and forego that income that you're accustomed to. And I suggest that, having answers to these questions at about a 95% confidence level makes a lot of sense. So with that, let's get right at it. So what's the first thing that we need to do? I think the most important thing that one needs to do at this point is establish a spending plan. This is probably the most important task that you can do right now before you contemplate retirement. What does that mean? Let's understand where our money's going. Where does your money go today? And it's going to serve as a good baseline to establish not only today's spending patterns, but also what spending I can anticipate when I'm no longer earning an income. Perhaps the easiest way to think about this, it can be daunting, but it doesn't have to be. Think of the three categories of spending that we all do. And let's start with the obvious: essential expenses, food, housing, healthcare. Think of those kinds of things that we must absolutely be able to pay for today, right? Now, there's discretionary expenses as well, things that we'd like to have. Sometimes you think in terms of wants and needs. Well, these are not the needs, these are the things you want. You're going to want vacations. We were going to want maybe to buy a different car. Some of the nice things that we want in life. And then finally, emergency expenses. Things don't always go well. Sometimes the car breaks down. Sometimes you get sick. So it's important to understand where is your money going today. And again, establishing a baseline. Probably the easiest way to do this task is to draw up a worksheet. And we'll talk about a worksheet that we're going to send out to you at the end of this presentation. But just tally up where your expenses are going. Where's your money going today? It helps to have a checkbook handy, or bank statements, investment statements. All those kinds of things will help you to fill out the information so that you have a good baseline moving forward. So how does spending change as we approach retirement? So presumably most of us on this call are still working. This is a good news, bad news story. The good news is spending typically declines as we get older and move towards retirement. You can look at this chart. I understand it's a busy chart, but if you look at the chart, you'll see different age categories at the bottom on the x-axis. And you'll notice over time that expenses typically go down, believe it or not. And this information comes from government statistics. And if you look at the different categories, you'll see that many of these categories actually stay pretty stable. Housing kind of stays stable. Healthcare stays stable and somewhat goes up a little bit. And if you look at where expenses typically go down, if you've got kids at home and you're maybe supporting kids with college payments and education, that's one category that goes down. And then lastly, one category that almost always goes down is that mortgage payment if you own a home. So, and that sort of explains why expenses typically go down in retirement. So that's the good news. even though you just did your worksheet and came up with a spending plan, it's a good chance that it might go a little bit lower. So when you see in your spending plan that you got the mortgage payment and that mortgage may be gone in 3 or 4 years, the idea here is to kind of calibrate your spending in coinciding with when you retire. So if you're having a little bit of difficulty coming up with a spending plan, perhaps use this information to think about the different categories of where your money's going. Once you've done that, you've looked at your expenses, you understand where your money's being spent today, you sort of anticipate where your dollars are going to go tomorrow. The next step, and another important step, what I call part 2, is coming up with an income plan. Remember, for most of us, we're going to be foregoing that paycheck. We're going to be leaving the workforce, and we have to replace that somehow. So how do we do that? How do we start anticipating what that income plan might look like? One easy way to do that, just like we did with categorizing our expenses, is let's try to categorize where those income sources might come from. And you'll see there's 3 categories. The number 1 category we have here is reliable income. What does that mean? Well, if you look in that blue box there, or the blue circle, Social Security. Believe it or not, this is a little Social Security card, but Social Security for most Americans is a very important component of that reliable income category. You know what your Social Security benefit is. You understand how it works. Very important. The typical American, for the typical American, Social Security replaces about 40% of our income. So as you can see, it's a very important element. Another area of reliable income might be a pension. If you work for a company that offered a pension plan that will pay you X number of dollars at age 65, another source of reliable income. So the idea here is just to tally up those different categories. Perhaps you have rental property and you're collecting rents. That might also be considered a reliable income source. The second category is investment income. Since you're on this call and you're thinking about retirement, I presume that most of us have retirement accounts. Perhaps we have a 401k plan, a 403b. You might have an IRA or Roth IRA, a brokerage accounts. Again, the idea here is let's just tally up the sources, the different places that income can come from in retirement. And then lastly, other sources, sometimes these are hidden sources. You own a home. Would some of the equity in the home be considered retirement income? Do you plan on downsizing perhaps? Maybe moving from the $500,000 house to a $300,000 house. Now that maybe kids are out of the household and you might want to shift some resources. Perhaps you have an inheritance. So there's a lot of different areas that other sources of income might be available to you if you think about it. So again, the idea here is, okay, let's tally up those different sources. And now what we want to do is want to transition a little bit. Let's talk about that reliable income source that's so important to so many Americans.
Hey, Mark.
Social Security.
Mark, I just wanted to make a point here. It's Jamie again, and
Sure.
I just want to point out to the folks on the call, remember or notice that Mark did not have your investments in that reliable income category. And so that's an area we're going to talk about later. We're going to talk about how do you create income from your investments, but it's not necessarily reliable because it's fluctuating with the market. So we're going to get into that and asset allocation a little bit today. And obviously yesterday's market, where the market was down 650 points, sort of points out why we say this. But I just want to make that point before we go on, just an observation. Thanks, Mark.
Yep. All right, so let's get into Social Security. Social Security is a very important program for most Americans. There's 2 key pieces of information you have to understand about Social Security. Number 1 is, when am I eligible for full Social Security benefits? So you can look at this chart here, and if we kind of focus in at the bottom, if you were born in the year 1960 or later, your full retirement age is 67. Now, if you're born before 1960, you'll see kind of moving up the chart, it's a sliding scale, and your full retirement age might be 66 years and 8 months if you were born in 1958. So the important point here is understand what your full Social Security age is. Because when you get your Social Security statement, or you look online and look at your benefit that's been accrued so far, Social Security is always going to report to you what your full Social Security benefit is. So the second aspect about Social Security that you want to understand is When can I get it? When can I get that benefit? And if you look at the chart, you'll see that the government allows us to access Social Security as early as age 62. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer that most advisors will give you is, well, it depends, right? If you collect Social Security early, the reality is you take a haircut and collect a smaller amount. The idea being that the smaller amount, you're going to collect a smaller amount over a longer period of time. The alternative is also true that if you decide to collect Social Security after your full retirement age, you would actually collect a higher benefit for a shorter period of time. And that's the way Social Security works. So for example, if we look at 100% benefit and you've earned a benefit of $2,000 a month at full retirement age, for someone who decided to collect Social Security at age 62, you can expect 70% of that. And your benefit will get reduced all the way down to $1,400 a month if you collected it early. And I'm just simply taking 70% times $2,000. The contrast is also, or the alternative is also true, that if you decided to wait and collect Social Security, that benefit could be as high as $2,500 a month, $2,480 to be exact. So for now, I'm not going to get too deep into Social Security because, as Jamie mentioned, on November 17th, we're going to do a full seminar on Social Security, how it works, and some strategies that you might be able to employ to optimize that benefit. But the last point I'll make about Social Security is, and a very important point is, there's some inflation protection built into the Social Security system. There's a cost of living adjustment that typically happens year after year. In fact, earlier this month, the Department of Labor reported that the COLA for 2021 is going to go up about 1.3%. What that means is anybody collecting Social Security today will have a 1.3% increase in benefit going into next year. So again, a very important concept, because remember, inflation is going to apply not only to our expenses, but also to our income. And in terms of Social Security, it will apply to this income source. So how much can or should Social Security replace? Well, like I mentioned before, Social Security replaces for the typical American about 40% of our income. Where does that come from? Well, again, if you look at the bottom of the chart, you see income across the bottom. And if you look at the dark blue feature, you'll see that if you have a household income about $75,000 today, you can expect there's that 40%, 42% income replacement that Social Security can expect to replace. Now, what's really interesting is if you're a high income household, say $300,000 a year income, Social Security replaces only about 11% of that income. So what's the idea here? For higher income workers, Social Security replaces a smaller amount of our income, which means more and more of our investment income has to be used to fill that gap and sustain the lifestyle that we're accustomed to. So hopefully that makes sense, and I'm sure we'll get a few questions on that. And well, let's keep moving, and now let's start talking a little bit about how this all comes together. So we have a little example here. We've got Sam, and Sam has done the work. He's done his spending plan. He estimates that his needs in retirement are going to be about $5,000 a month. And he's also done the math. He's tallied up his Social Security benefit, maybe a pension, small pension somewhere. Maybe he's got some rental income. And for our purposes, let's assume that he comes up with an amount of $3,500 that he can consider reliable income. What he's really been able to do now is he's been able to quantify what is that gap. In this case, $1,500 a month. And that gap represents what Jamie was referring to is, now I've got my other resources, these retirement accounts. How am I going to deploy these retirement accounts to generate $1,500 a month each and every month to fill this gap in retirement? And that gets us into what we're calling the decumulation phase. What's the decumulation phase? Well, for most of our careers, 20, 30, 40 years in the workforce, we've accumulated dollars. We've put money aside in 401k plans, IRAs, to anticipate spending down in retirement. Now's the phase when we no longer have an income, we have to decumulate or generate retirement income out of these money sources. So you see here the big 4%. What does this represent? This is sometimes known as the 4% rule. And what the 4% rule basically says is you have a good chance of looking at your retirement resources, dollars that you have earmarked for retirement, and if you spend down approximately 4% each and every year on an inflation adjusted basis, you have a fairly good chance of not running out of money during the duration of your retirement horizon. Again, on an inflation adjusted basis. So
And
let's
Mark,
look at an example.
Mark,
Go ahead.
the point I make here is just to remind people that 4% is not a dollar amount. Remember, so just think back to 2008, and if you had been retired at that point and you were taking 4% in 2007 of your total value, and then your value dropped because the market crashed. Now, to maintain that pace, you should really only take 4%. But most people think in terms of taking a dollar amount, not a percentage. Because if you took that percentage, what it would do is say, actually, the dollar amount you can take in 2008 is a lot lower. So you're going to have to scrimp on some of those budget items that you would have liked to pay for. So, or you have to take a higher percentage of that lower value because of the market crash. And therefore, you're going to, you may run out of money quicker than you had thought. So I think that the percentage aspect of this is important to keep in mind. Again, so that you all go into retirement with your eyes wide open, understanding how this works. Thanks, Mark.
Yep. Also, the 4% idea is it's really an upper limit. Try not to exceed 4%, because if you start taking out 6 and 7, 8% of your retirement resources in retirement, there's a really good chance you probably are going to run out of money if you withdraw money too fast. So again, to the example, in this example, let's assume that as a household, you've put aside $500,000 of retirement resources. What the 4% rule, or I prefer to say the 4% guideline, suggests is 4% times $500,000 represents approximately a $20,000 withdrawal in year one of retirement. So this individual would set aside $20,000 a year. So if you kind of do the math here, $20,000 a year, and if we go back to our friend Sam, if we take $20,000 and divide it by 12, that's about $1,600 a month. So if we go back to Sam, he's built and quantified that gap as $1,500 a month. On the surface, it looks like, you know what? Sam's probably going to be okay because he has a balance of $500,000. He can expect to take out no more than $20,000 a year. He's probably okay. He's probably not going to run out of dollars. So as Jamie was alluding to, you look at year 2, year 3, as long as your investment portfolio maintains its purchasing power in terms of inflation, you have a good chance to increase your withdrawals year after year after year. Now, obviously, if markets do go down, the question is, are you going to have to take out a little bit less? So again, it's a guideline. It gives, there's no absolutes in this business. We don't really know what the future holds. But there's been lots of studies done with this 4%. This concept was actually studied by a gentleman named William Bengen in 1994. He did a lot of research. And interesting, I got a magazine in the mail 2 days ago, and Mr. Bengen has revised his 4% rule. And that 4% is a lot closer to about 4.5% based on current research. So again, it's a moving target, but it gives you guidelines. And I think that's the important part of this. And again, looking at the withdrawal rate, the idea is, can I make my money last as long as I do? And if you look at the chart here, there's that same $500,000 that Sam started with. If he starts withdrawing at a 6% withdrawal rate, if we take the extreme on the right-hand side, he might run out of money early. And that's the danger. The contrast is someone who's withdrawing a lot less than 4%, there's a good chance they may never run out of money. And again, dollars to fill the gap. And that's the idea. These are sort of benchmarks to go by.
And this is a really key visual for anybody who's planning to retire or already in retirement, just to make sure they don't fall short on that 6% withdrawal where you see it just, the account goes to zero before they reach their longevity. And so you really just need to pay attention to what your withdrawal rate is, and then that nest egg that you're drawing off of. Remember, that goes up and down if it's in the market. And so that's something to be aware of. But the idea is if you withdraw at that 4% rate, it's going to replace what you're taking out through growth.
Yeah, and also you want to look at this year after year after year. It's always, you don't want to set it and forget it and then forget about it. You've got to monitor this over time. So in the years where we have good markets, you know what? You might be able to withdraw a little bit more. But again, that 4% is sort of the upper limit. You really want to be careful in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years of retirement not to exceed that 4% threshold. So with that, let's assume you've done all the work. You've crunched the numbers, you've done the spending plan, you have a high confidence that you understand what your spending needs are, you understand your reliable income, you've done some math, and you have a plan to withdraw out of retirement accounts. The question is, what do I do now? So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Zach, and Zach's going to talk about, okay, you're ready to kind of leave the workforce, what do you do? So go ahead, Zach, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so great example, really important stuff. I just want to first make the point that when you do retire, that's not the time and the event where you have to make an immediate decision. I want to clear the air there because a lot of people think, okay, now that I have left my employment, I have to make a decision on my retirement plan. So that's not the case. You can actually, as you see here from this graphic and slide, you can leave it in your current plan. It's always the one option to continue to defer the taxes if you haven't really made a decision yet on what you want to do with it. Now, the other alternative is, let's say you haven't fully retired and you're moving to another job, you can move it to another employer plan, but that's obviously not typical for the person here. Let's assume that you guys are fully retiring. The majority of your options, the primary options that you have will be between leaving it in the plan and then rolling it to a rollover IRA. Now, a rollover IRA, in case you are not aware of what that is an individual retirement account where you can now invest your assets as you'd like. That's one of the huge benefits of a retirement plan, of an IRA, meaning that you can choose the universe of investment options. So stocks, bonds, mutual funds, money markets, anything at all, you can invest in within an IRA. That's different than leaving it in the plan where you do have that select menu to choose from. So if that's important to you, then that's a reason to roll it to an IRA. So this is a complex decision, and that's where we can come in and go over what might be best for you. Because if you're a do-it-yourselfer, then like I said, you can choose those investments. You can also roll it to an annuity IRA as an option. Mark's going to talk about annuities a little bit more later on here. And then you can also, if you have a financial advisor you'd like, want a little bit more custom advice and financial planning, that is also another reason to roll it to an IRA. But if the plan is doing it for you, satisfying your needs, then like I said, you can always leave it in the plan if you haven't made that decision. And then lastly, the cash distribution. That's not really a typical option that we recommend for most people, just because you can imagine at that point there's a taxable event and you will have to pay ordinary income tax at that time that you take the distribution. So let's be honest, this money is for your retirement. You most likely will not create an income stream from that distribution, that check at that point. So that's not really something we usually recommend. But again, if you have questions on what's best in my scenario, that's what we're here for. We'll go over that. So if you look at this now slide, a lot of people ask us, hey, Zach, Mark, Jamie, how do I spend down these dollars? And what are the different, because I've accumulated all these different accounts, what's the order, the sequence that I should spend down these dollars in retirement? And as you can see here, we're going to talk about the typical order based off of a typical scenario, but I'd like to say everyone's different, and that's why you would definitely benefit from talking it through just to see, okay, what's best for me. So as you can see here, number one, the taxable accounts is usually what you'll spend down first, because in theory, that money, well, in actuality, that money is being taxed each year for all the gains that you have. So basically, you will be taxed each year on those investments. And the contrast to leaving it in a tax deferred account is that those same investments can grow tax free until you take the money out. So if you notice that line here at the bottom, we believe this allows tax advantage accounts to stay invested longer for most investors. That means that those assets that are growing, like I said, you don't have to pay taxes on it each year. So that's the benefit. But Uncle Sam is only so nice, and I say that with required minimum distributions in mind. And Mark will get into some examples of RMDs, but required minimum distributions at age 72, by the way, that law has changed. It used to be 70 and a half, but at age 72, they require, the IRS requires you to take the money out and pay taxes on it. So that is the time you'll have to pay taxes. All right, and then lastly, to close up your accounts, you want to spend down the tax-free accounts last. And that rationale is because, again, those assets will grow tax deferred, and then you can take them out tax-free. And for the typical person, they want to leave some money to their heirs. And if you have, for an example, a Roth IRA, that will be a tax-free asset, and those beneficiaries can get that money tax-free. So that's one example on why this is the typical order for someone to spend down their assets. Now, I'll leave it to Mark to go over an atypical order, something a little bit more personalized, which is why you definitely want to consider and talk to some financial professionals, someone like us, to help review what's best for me. So with that, I will turn it back over to Mark.
Thanks, Zach. That's an excellent point. I mean, this is the typical order that one might look to spend down their assets. But who's typical, right? Are you typical? Well, there might be some, in fact, there are many scenarios where you might not want to use this order, and it depends on your circumstance. It depends on your goals. It depends on where your resources are located in terms of, do you have more dollars in taxable accounts or tax deferred accounts and so on. So there's a lot of factors that are involved with optimizing how do I spend down my assets. And that's where financial planners come in terms of, what we do on a day-to-day basis is we will lay out projections of where your dollars are going to come from. Now, for example, you could be an individual with most of your assets in a tax-deferred asset. And let's say that individual has a very small gap. When they did the gap like Sam did, the gap is very small. So the need for income perhaps is not that large. And for example, and they may also have another goal of leaving dollars to heirs. In that scenario, because of the required minimum distribution rules that Zach alluded to, someone could take out very minimal amount of dollars in tax deferred assets, and then they get to that magic age of 72, and they find, holy cow, I have a whole lot of dollars that Uncle Sam is requiring me to take out now, and it could throw me in a higher tax bracket. So if you can kind of look down the road and anticipate that, it might be a better option for that individual to spend some of those tax deferred assets early in retirement to even out the tax liability over time. So that's one example. Sometimes it might make sense to move the tax-free assets early. And again, there's countless scenarios. It's a very individualized thing. And it's the kind of thing, if you think it applies to you, I'd encourage you to talk to a financial advisor, a certified financial planner, and see if they can help you kind of optimize this. The other thing to factor as well is, tax policy changes. Tax rates change. Who knows what's going to happen in November with the election and the tax policies. Not to get too complicated, but this kind of decision may change during the course of your retirement, depending on how laws change. So just know that typical is not always the best for everybody. And that's really the point. So we'll briefly talk a little bit about annuities. And I can't tell you how many times I have spoken to people, and I've spoken to probably more than I want to say a couple of thousand people in my career. And sometimes, often, people will come up to me and say, hey, I'm getting ready to retire, and I saw this guy, and he said, I should roll my money into an annuity. Is that a good idea, Mark? And I say, maybe, maybe not. It depends. It depends what problem you're trying to solve. If you look at this grid here, which is overwhelming just to look at, there's countless different kinds of annuities, and they all do different things. And again, my question back to that individual is, what problem are you trying to solve? Are you looking for more income? Are you looking for income now? Are you looking for guarantees? Is that important to you? This is a very, very complicated product set. The people that sell these products have to have an insurance license. Sometimes they have to have a securities license. They're very complex. It's important to talk to someone who's independent and get an assessment, not only just talking to the insurance guy that might be talking to you about this, but understand, you need guarantees. Is that important to you? How much guarantees are you willing to pay for? Because nothing's free. Anytime you buy a guarantee, you have to pay for it. And is the price worth the cost? So I would just encourage you just to review that with somebody who's competent, who can walk you through the different options. It may make sense for you, it may not. Just
Yeah,
a lot of these decisions, when you make some of these decisions, they're irrevocable. So if you make a decision now, sometimes you can't go back, so be careful.
Yeah, Mark, I think I'll interject here. It's Jamie again. And I think, an annuity is just one of the tools in the toolbox. And I think it can definitely make sense in some cases, but in some cases it maybe isn't the best decision. And I think it's just, Mark's point really is you just want to get that objective viewpoint and make an informed decision. And then I think I may have said this before, but with a lot of these things we're talking about, it's not necessarily all or nothing. And so theoretically, you can take a nest egg and split it into different uses and employ various different tools. And so I think that's the other thing is, as Mark said, we often hear from people, hey, should I buy an annuity? And oftentimes they're thinking of it as the only option, when in fact there might be multiple ways to, if they want to do that, and an annuity is the right decision, it might be part of the decision and not the be all and end all. Thanks, Mark.
Great point. So you'll notice that up till now, we've really not spoken a whole lot about investing. Guess what? When we're retired, we still have to invest our money. And how do we do that? It's a little bit easier when we're working and we're younger, that we're investing for growth or moderate growth, depending on our risk tolerance. So in many cases, it's a lot easier when we're working. Now the game changes a little bit, and you start wanting to be a little bit more cautious with your dollars. And if you think back of the spending plan, we identified those essential expenses. Looking at the triangle, we call it needs, right? We want to make sure that we have enough of those dollars coming out of reliable income sources, be it with Social Security or pensions, or maybe a cash account in a bank. Jamie often talks about the bucket strategy, where we have some current income ready and not subject to market forces. A lot of those dollars are intended to meet needs or immediate needs, something that's going to happen within the next year or two. And then maybe deploying the rest of our resources could be used with more risky assets, be it stocks or aggressive bonds or alternative investments. So again, the investing challenge doesn't go away. You just have to be cognizant that you've got some liquidity needs now that is replacing your paycheck. And you've got to be able to have a place for those dollars to come from. So finally, this presentation was, is for educational purposes. We're not giving tax advice. We have to be compliant and show this chart to you, so we are doing that. And I'm sure that we've got questions that have queued up over time, but the point is, it's really important to spend some time in going over these questions and, kicking the tires. Do you have enough dollars? I may have mentioned it earlier that, more than half of Americans who retire have not answered these questions. That's like, trying to go to California and you don't really have a roadmap. How do you get there? follow the sun? I mean, that's kind of a tricky way to do it. So answer these questions. And one of the things that Strategic Retirement Partners has is we've got lots of tools and software that can help you crunch these numbers for you and kind of help yourself answer these questions with some confidence. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jamie. And Jamie, you've probably got a bunch of questions queued up, and we'll go from there. And I think we'll turn the video back on so you can see our pretty mugs.
Speak for yourself, Mark.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Zach, and thank you everybody else for who's joined us and is here. Yeah, we have some questions that have come in that I've been compiling, and I'll go ahead and go through those and toss those out there. But just a reminder, if you're looking at your screen and you can hit the chat, that's the way you can ask a question. And we have about 15 minutes left, so we can go through any questions you have. So let me go to a couple questions we've got now and throw those out there. So before I do that, just to recap what Mark and Zach talked about in terms of the steps. You want to establish a spending plan, right? That's definitely an important step. 3 key areas: essential expenses, discretionary expenses, emergency expenses. Social Security replaces about 40% of your income. So how are you going to replace the other 60% of your income? So that's the income replacement part of the next step, which is to think about, make a plan. How am I going to replace that 60% that's not going to be replaced by Social Security? We always say, who has trouble making ends meet today? Well, that's when you have a full paycheck. Imagine if you cut that paycheck and now you get only 40% of your paycheck. So make a plan now for how you're going to recover and replace that. The next thing is decide, what are you going to do with your retirement account when you retire? Are you going to roll it over? Are you going to leave it in the plan? You're going to take a distribution in cash. Number 4, decide which accounts you're going to tap first for income and spending, my taxable accounts or my tax deferred accounts. And then what percentage are you going to draw down? The budget worksheet we're going to send you is going to help you with that. We also have great calculators, and there's lots of great calculators online to help you figure that out. But point is, which accounts am I going to tap first, and what percent can I afford to draw down so I don't run out of money? And finally, consider your asset allocation. Make sure you're ready for the next phase, whether it's transition or decumulation. We've seen some volatility. We had a lot of volatility in March, and then we recovered. So in life, you don't often get 2 bites at the apple, but in this case, the markets come back. If you felt in March that you were not allocated properly and you're still in there and you held in there, great, you've recovered. But now you have another opportunity to make sure your allocation is proper for how you're going to be going forward. So look at the amount of stocks, bonds, and cash you have, make sure that's the right fit for you. So the questions we got: number 1, is Social Security based on your 5 highest earning years? So
no, it's not. We're going to get into that on November 17th. It's actually based on 35 years of work history. There's a calculation, a pretty complicated calculation that's done.
Okay.
But it's 35 years of work history, not the last 5. No.
Where we do see that phraseology or the 5, that sometimes is a formula that's built into your pension plan. So if you have a pension plan, sometimes that's going to be part of the formula, and they'll take your 5 highest earning years and then base your pension amount on that. Number 2, is there a certain age where starting a Roth does not make sense? Zach or Mark, throw that out to you guys.
Take that, Zach.
Sure, I'll take that. Yeah, personally, as long as you have 5 years of a time horizon, because with the Roths, you have a 5-year clock with the Roth IRA in particular. So from your first contribution into a Roth IRA, that starts a 5-year clock. I don't know if we mentioned this in the presentation, but just to reiterate that from that contribution, you can put $25, $5, it doesn't matter. But that's when, after 5 years, you can take that money out tax-free, like we alluded to in the presentation. That's the earnings we're talking about tax-free. So long as you have that 5-year time horizon and then an objective for having tax-free dollars, whether it be, like I said, leaving some money to your heirs, or do you just want some tax diversification, which makes sense to have as well. That's why Roth is a huge benefit. There's not just investment diversification. So that's my answer. So in terms of a particular age, you know, I wouldn't say there's a particular age, but so long as you have that 5-year time horizon, and then yes, an objective. People always like to say, you know, now that I'm in retirement, or I'm 65 now, or it's too late to open a Roth IRA or start contributing. My view is that's not really the case. You know, as long as you have an objective for the dollars.
I would also add to that, Zach, we are historically in very, very low income tax rates in this country when you look back since the 1920s. So what's the probability that income tax rates go up or down? I think the probability is it probably goes up. So is it better to pay the tax now rather than later? So I think that's also a stronger argument that, you know, now is not too late.
The conventional wisdom is that you save in a 401k or 403b when you're because you're paying high taxes, and then when you take it out, your income goes down and you'll be paying lower tax. You'll be in a lower tax rate. Again, that's conventional wisdom, but as Mark said, we in a historically low tax rate environment, and so it's possible that rates could go up. So, by the way, I keep saying all or none. You can do a little bit of both. So you can take your 401k contribution if your plan allows for a Roth contribution or a Roth, 403b or 401k. You can take some money, like let's say you want to defer 10%. You can take 5% and put it in the 401k, and then 5% in the Roth 401k, and that way you're sort of hedging or diversifying. And then when you take it out, some of the money you have is going to come out tax-free, some of it's going to come out after tax. So just a thought there. Next question is, can multiple 401ks be rolled into one, or does each plan have to have its own rollover? So in other words, let's say I've worked at 3 companies or 4 or 5 companies over my lifetime, and so I still have all these 401ks out there at different companies. Now I'm ready to retire. Does each 401k at each company have to be rolled into its own IRA, or can it have its own rollover? Zach, I'll ask you about that one. Why don't you take that?
Sure. So quick answer, no. It does not need separate IRAs. You can have one IRA for a rollover for all of them. Okay, you can roll them all into one IRA, and usually that's what people do, just to have everything consolidated in one account. You know, make it easy. But again, that's if they chose an IRA as their vehicle and that satisfies their need for them. So, you know, that decision, like we talked about before, you know, what do I do with my retirement plan? Does it make sense for me to roll it to an IRA? Then that's the first question. But yes, you can consolidate them all into one if you'd like.
Great, thank you. And I think, you know, we talk about that all the time, consolidating. When you leave an employer, some people think, I've heard people say before, well, I want to be diversified. I've always heard diversification is good, and so I want to diversify, so I'm going to have all these accounts all over the place. The reality is you're diversifying where they're held, but the investments, you know, you can diversify your investments appropriately in one account. You don't need 7 or 8. So I think that one thing we see as a good practice is to at least look at whether it makes sense for you to consolidate all your old 401ks into your current plan's 401k. And then obviously they'll all be in one place when you leave, and you won't have to do the multiple rollovers. If you've ever dealt with rolling over from a plan into an IRA, it is not always a fun process with all the paperwork and the 800 numbers and the passwords and all that kind of stuff. So tracking stuff becomes easier when it's all in one place, and that's just a thought. Another question we had is, how often are reverse mortgages used as a reliable income stream, and what's the median retirement length today? So I think that's a 2-part question, actually. The first one's about reverse mortgages. The second one is, I think I'll interpret this, but once I retire, how long do I live? And that's more of a life expectancy conversation. And we have some great stats on that, actually, in terms of, you know, how long does the average 65-year-old live?
Yeah.
Good, bad news, if you're a female, you live longer, which is great news, but it just means you're gonna have to have more money because you're living longer. So anyway, it sort of depends, but I don't know, just off the top of my head, 65, what is it, a 50% chance of age 95 if you're 65 or something like that?
I think it's like 25%. I think the average life expectancy for a male today is, I want to say 84, and a female is 86.
Yeah.
But then there's like a 25% chance that one of them will live till age 95. So the longevity question is definitely important when you start calculating how long my money needs to last.
Yep.
In terms of the reverse mortgage, yeah, you do see some scenarios today where people are living off that home equity, and it's a way to take money, equity out of your house and supply yourself with income. You know, it gets back to that slide I was showing with some hidden income sources with the house. I think, you know, highly government regulated, I think there might be some better alternatives, maybe a home equity, a line of credit, or look at refinancing, because we have historically low mortgage rates today. I would look at other options first, but we absolutely do see trends with reverse mortgages creating some tax-free income for retirees. Why is it tax-free? Because they paid taxes on a long time ago and they paid off the mortgage with it. You're basically taking the money back out of the house.
Yeah. All right. See if we have any other questions here. The other question that we get too is, let me just see. I had a couple. We talked about when should I access my Social Security? That's when we get all the time. Age 62, age 65, age 70. Really, it depends on your situation. We're going to have that seminar on November 17th on Social Security. We can get into that a little bit more. Which account should I draw down from first is another one I get all the time. Mark and Zach, we've heard that quite a few times. Again, that's sort of an individual scenario, but you know, you want to look at the taxes. Is buying an annuity a good idea? That's one that we addressed earlier. What if I already know I have enough to retire on? Well, if you're ahead in the race, maybe you don't need to take that same amount of risk because you've already got there. So I think that's an asset allocation question. If you're behind in the race, same thing. You might need to take a little bit more risk in order to get there, or you might need to just dial down your expectations of the lifestyle you're going to expect. And I think bottom line is the budget worksheet we send you that you should sketch out doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, don't let perfect get in the way of good here, but have that budget worksheet, go through it, figure out what your gap is. We saw the example with Sam. I think it's a really, really important first step for you as someone who's either in retirement or considering retirement. Let's see. Yeah, I think one more check on questions. It's about 12:54 right now, so we do have a couple more minutes. I think the other thing, just to make the point, is the reason we're having this conversation is we want you to reach out and know that we're here to help you. We are financial experts. We've got all kinds of tools and resources, whether it's financial planning software, whether it's calculators, worksheets, those kinds of things. And we've got a whole library of content research. So if there's a question you're wondering about Roth or annuities or rollovers or reverse mortgages or anything, let us know. We can get you some topical information. And again, we just kind of wanted to make sure people were aware of the fact that we can talk to them about things that are retirement related, but also outside the scope of that, maybe just to consult with folks. So we want to help you. Our goal here was to open the conversation and create some dialogue. And the next steps for you really is just mark your calendar for the session we're going to have in November and December, where we'll get into a little bit more detail on this. And we hope you'll join us. You're free to invite anybody you want, even if it's a different company or a friend or whatever the case might be. So with that said, we'll end a little bit early here unless there's other questions. I don't see any other questions. So we'll just say have a great day and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.